I'm going to teach you the easiest way to animate any consumable product in Blender, and this is the best way to make a few $100 even if you're just a beginner. I've received this model right here from a client who wants me to use this to create some animations. Now I already have a couple of videos on my channel where I taught you how to create bottles like this from scratch. This is super easy, but if you want, I can make a complete beginner tutorial for how to make a bottle like this from scratch. And you're going to be able to use that bottle for any animation ever. Every vitamin bottle or every supplement bottle is basically the same shit. If you have one model, you can just adjust that model to fit the right size, and you can make 1,000 different animations just using that one model. Now when you want to create an animation in Blender, the first thing that you have to do is go up here and switch to the Animation Workspace. This just arranges your windows a little bit differently, which is a little bit better for animating stuff. Now for some reason, as soon as I switch to this Animation Workspace, it looks like my view is spinning around an invisible object here. So I'm going to focus on this bottle by selecting the bottle and pressing the full stop on my number pad. Now if for some reason inconceivable to me you have a keyboard which doesn't have a number pad, you can just select this object, go up here to view and click on frame select. Now you're going to be focusing on this specific object. Now I don't want to be in rendered view. I'm going to switch to textured view right here just because currently the lighting is a little bit better and I can see what I'm doing. But we're going to switch back to rendered view a little bit later when we add some lights. And here's the first thing you have to do before you start creating your animation. You have to come up with an idea of what you're going to create. If you just try to randomly do something, most likely it's not going to turn out good. You have to think about how your camera is going to be positioned. You have to think about how the object is going to move. And you also have to think about what your lighting is going to look like approximately. Now, if you're a beginner, of course, you probably can't come up with this, but here's what you can do instead. And some of you are going to call me a con artist, but it doesn't matter. If you don't want to get paid, you don't have to. You can go to Instagram and search for some animations of supplements and vitamin bottles, either presented by the company which is selling them or by the company which animated them, okay? And you're going to realize that most of it is just very basic shit. You can copy this for the product which you're working with at that particular time, and your client is going to be more than happy with something similar. You don't even have to do something this complicated. You can do something very simple, and then as you build your skills more and more, you can start adding more details to this animation. In this video, I'm just going to show you something very simple, which is just going to give you an idea of how animation works, so you can do something and you can still get paid. But if you guys really like this video and if you want, we can make some more complex animations, we can add some more crazy shit. Just let me know in the comments and we're gonna keep moving in this direction. I like this animation. This is very easy, and I also like this one where one bottle turns into 3 bottles. So we're going to try to create those 2 animations. And then if you guys really like this and if you want me to make another video, we can make something like this where we get a box, we get some pills, we get some details, we get some little badge over here. We can add some more complexity to the scene if you want to. So here's how easy this is. First of all, we have to create a background, and the background has to have the colors of the product. In this case, we have this green color. So with Shift S, I'm going to snap my cursor to the world origin, and then with Shift A, I'm going to add a new plane. S, I'm going to scale that plane up, and let's move over here to the material properties. Create a new material by pressing this button right here, and we're going to name this background. Click on this white base color button right here. We're going to change the color into something green, which is similar to this label color. So we have to also reduce the brightness a little bit, increase the saturation, and I don't want this surface to reflect that much light. So I'm going to expand this specular menu right here and reduce the IOR level to reduce how much light is being reflected from the surface. We can also try reducing the roughness, and you're probably gonna have to adjust the color a little bit more. But for now, let's just go with something like this, and we're gonna make some more adjustments once we start adding some lights and once the scene is gonna look a little bit different. Now, since we're using the Eevee render engine, which is the faster and simpler render engine in Blender as opposed to Cycles, which is very slow but also very realistic, we have to do something if we want to get an acceptable render result. Right now, this scene, as you can see, looks completely unrealistic. It looks like it's your first time opening Unity and trying to create a game. There's no shadows, there's no reflections, there's no nothing. With just a couple of clicks, you can make this look a lot better. So when you're in the render properties tab right here, check ambient occlusion. As you can see now, we got a little bit of shading. Then check screen space reflection. And now if you reduce the roughness of the floor, you're going to see your bottle is reflected in the floor. If we don't check this, there's no reflection. You might also have to adjust some properties in the screen space reflections menu, such as the thickness, trace precision, max roughness, edge fading, whatever. Try to find something that works a little bit better. And you can also check bloom and try to play with some of the settings here. although right now that's probably not going to be visible. We're gonna have to add some more lights and probably render the scene so that we can see this. Now select this plane, press tab to go to edit mode. Make sure that you're in edge select mode by clicking up here on this middle button or by pressing 2, and just select this edge in the background right here. Press E to extrude, right click to snap it back to its original place, G to move it, and Z to only move it on the Z axis. We're going to lift it up to approximately this high, and we're also going to press G and X to move it backwards on the X axis, and then we're gonna select this edge here, press Ctrl B to bevel it. We're gonna make the bevel approximately this wide. In the bevel menu down here, we're gonna set the shape value to 0.5, and we're going to increase the number of segments so that this is a smooth transition here. We're also going to select everything with A and scale it up on the Y axis to make it wider. Now press tab to go back to object mode. Go up here to object and click on shade smooth. Now we got a nice background. These reflections look a little bit stupid, so we're going to increase the roughness of the material. Now here's the animation idea that I have from that commercial which we just saw. Our camera is slowly going to approach this bottle, and the bottle is going to start at an angle like this, and then it's going to move into this angle, and we're also going to make it do a spin before it comes into its final form, where we can see the front of the label very clearly. So let me show you how you can very easily create this animation. We're going to select this object and rotate it a little bit around the x-axis like this, and this is going to be the initial position of the bottle. Now since we're in the animation workspace, we got our timeline right here where we can tell Blender how to move this object. To do that, we have to create keyframes, and if you don't know what keyframes are, they're just points in time which we mark on this timeline down here, which tell Blender to perform a certain action at that time. We can create a keyframe at the beginning of our timeline right here in this position by placing the marker right here, selecting this bottle, and pressing I, keyframe location and rotation. Now we can move the marker to another point in time, such as this one right here. We can rotate this around the x-axis a little bit to straighten it out, and we're also going to move it forwards a little bit on the x-axis to bring it closer to the camera. Now again, make sure that your marker is placed here, then again press I, keyframe location rotation, and now Blender knows that at this point the bottle has to be in a different position, which is this one right here. So now when you go back here and you play the animation, the bottle is going to move from its original position into its final position. If you want to make this faster, you can just right click on this right here, press G and move it a little bit closer, and now it's going to take less time to perform this animation, which means it's going to be faster. Now we're going to delete all these keyframes because there's something else we have to do before we start creating the animation, which I have in mind. So select these keyframes, press X, delete keyframes, and now we're going to press N in object mode. Find the item menu here and set all the rotation values to 0 to straighten this back out. And here's what we're going to do to give us some more control over the rotation of this object. With Shift S, we're going to snap the 3D cursor to this bottle. Then we're going to press Shift A, and we're going to add some empty plane axes. Scale this object up a little bit with S so that you can see it. And as you can see, we just got a couple of lines sticking out of this bottle. This is what the shape looks like. We're going to use this to help us with our animations. With Shift D, we're going to duplicate this and then right click to bring it back into place. And then with G and Y, we're going to move it out to here approximately. And this is essentially going to be the controller or steering wheel for this object, which is going to help us rotate this a little bit more accurately. Shift select this empty object, then press Ctrl P, parent object keep transform. And now if you move this empty object, the bottle is also going to follow it. Now we're going to rotate this a little bit around the x-axis like this. Press I, keyframe location rotation. Make sure that's in frame 0. And we're also going to collapse this just so we don't have 4 dots, so we only have 1 dot. Then move to something like frame 100. We can press N again and set the rotation here to 0 to straighten this out. Or maybe we can also tilt it a little bit the other way. But in any case, we're going to bring it a little bit closer like this. Now press I again, keyframe location rotation, and now we have this simple animation. By default, this animation is kind of smooth. It starts very slowly and then accelerates, and then it slows down before it gets to the final position. We can change this by selecting all these keyframes with A, then pressing T and selecting linear interpolation. This just makes the movement constant and there's no acceleration or deceleration whatsoever. In physics, this is known as uniform motion because the rate of change in the object's position is constant. So the speed, or rather the velocity, does not change. But I'm not trying to teach you physics today. If you want to learn some physics, then follow me on Rumble, link is below. I can make some physics tutorials over there. Once we got this simple motion out of the way, I'm going to select this keyframe and move it a little bit closer to make this a little bit faster. And then I'm going to select this empty, go to the constraints tab right here, add object constraint, and we're going to add a transformation constraint. Use this eyedropper right here to target this other empty object. Check extrapolate, Make sure that the target is world space and set the owner to local space. Open up the map from menu. We're going to map from rotation. In the Z minimum, we're going to type in -1, and in the maximum, we're going to type in 1. Then open up map to, move to rotation, and once again we're going to set the Z minimum to -1 and the maximum to 1. Now when we rotate this empty object, the other empty as well as the bottle which is parented to it is also rotating on its local Z axis. So even if this bottle is placed at an odd angle like this, it's always going to rotate around this axis, kind of like the Earth, which is tilted by 23.5 or what degrees. And now as this animation plays, we can just rotate this whatever way we want. So really we're going to create keyframes on this object instead of this one right here. It can get very confusing and messy if you try to keyframe different transforms or different attributes of an object on the same timeline, or rather on the same object. It's very useful to use controllers for this to prevent shit from getting messy. So here's my idea. We're gonna start by rotating very slowly, then it's gonna make a sudden spin and it's going to align back with its original position, and that's going to be the final position of this particular animation. So first we're going to place this approximately like this, so it's tilted slightly to the left. Then on frame 0 press I and keyframe the rotation of this empty right here, and then in the final position we're going to rotate this by a full circle like this and press I, keyframe rotation. Now you can see that the motion is almost there, but we still have to adjust the speed a little bit. I want this to start a little bit more slowly, and then I want the fast movement to be a little bit faster, and the end is supposed to be a little bit slower. To do that, we're going to select the first keyframe of this side empty, Shift D to duplicate this and bring it to somewhere around here, then take the last keyframe, Shift D to duplicate that and bring it a little bit closer as well. Watch what happens now when we play this animation. It starts off with no rotation around this axis, then it suddenly does the rotation, and then it freezes back up again, and it comes all the way to the end. And now to make this motion a little bit smoother, we're going to place our marker on this vertex right here, rotate this controller just by a little bit, then keyframe that. And now when you play this animation, it's slowly going to rotate before the big rotation, then it's going to do the full rotation, and then it's going to slow back down. We're also going to come here to this next keyframe and rotate it backwards just a little bit so it has some more work to do in this period right here. Now again press I, keyframe rotation, and you can play around with the positions of these keyframes to adjust how this looks. You can bring this one a little bit closer, you can push them all a little bit closer to the beginning, you can try closing this gap. We can even pull the first keyframe backwards a little bit with G, so that when we start the animation there's already a little bit of motion. And remember that we can select this empty as well and bring this keyframe closer to make everything faster. And here's another thing I want to do with this. In this period where we have this fast spinning, I want the bottle to also straighten out a little bit more quickly in this particular moment. So we're also going to do something similar here. We're going to duplicate this keyframe with Shift D again, and we're going to try to place it on the exact frame where this fast spinning begins to happen, which appears to be around frame 37. You can also check by just selecting this one right here, and you can see it's right here on 34. Now on this duplicated keyframe for this one, we're going to rotate it by a little bit on the x-axis and keyframe that. Also make sure that you adjust the position on the x-axis, because otherwise it's not going to move, because we just duplicated this keyframe where it's placed in the middle of the world. Now bring the marker around here somewhere, rotate this a little bit more on the x-axis, bring it a little bit closer, press I, keyframe location rotation. And now we also have a little bit of a jump here when we have this quick rotation on the bottle, and that's going to give us a pretty cool animation. Remember that you might still have to adjust some positions of different keyframes for both objects, but before you know it, you're gonna get a very smooth animation. And now we're ready to set up some lighting. So we're going to first move over to the shading workspace. We're going to enter rendered view, and now the scene is completely dark because we got no light. In my shader editor, I'm going to switch from object to world, and now I can use an image to cast light into our scene. So go to Google and type in HDRI, click on this first website called Polyhaven HDRIs, and we're going to search for studio right here. And it's probably going to work best if we have a studio with relatively natural lighting. I tried searching bathroom, and this modern bathroom looks like it's gonna work pretty well as well. So click on that, click on download right here, and now in Blender we're gonna go up here to edit, preferences, add-ons, type in node, and check this box right here which says node wrangler. Close this menu, select this background node right here and press Ctrl T. Now you got some nodes where you can load up an image. So click on open, and in your downloads folder you're going to be able to type in bathroom, or just type in EXR to find all your downloaded HDRIs. Load up the one that you want, and before you know it, now you got your bathroom around your scene. Obviously this makes things look a lot more realistic, and here you can also see the bloom that I was telling you about about earlier. Now the only reason we want this HDRI is to create some reflections in our object. So we're going to reduce the strength of this to something like 0.4 or even 0.3. And I'm also going to add some lights myself, which are going to be artificial. So select this bottle, press Shift S, cursor to selected. With Shift A, add a new light, and we're going to use an area light. Lift that above the scene, scale it up, and then in the light properties right here with this little green light bulb, we're going to increase the power until it has a significant effect on our scene. You can see that if I set the power to something like 1000 in this case, it looks a lot better. And now we're going to rotate this around the y-axis, lower it down, and also push it backwards a little bit like this so that it's in front of the object. It might be easier if we use a 3D cursor as a pivot point, then snap that to the bottle with Shift S, and now we can just rotate this lamp around the bottle as we wish. So we're going to place it around here somewhere. You can move it backwards by pressing G and double Z. Now slide it back, crank up the power a little bit more. I'm gonna go with something like 3000, and with Shift D we're going to duplicate this, right click, and then rotate it to bring it over here to the other side. Now before we continue, let's add a camera, because that's going to allow us to see what we're doing and what we're creating and what the product is going to look like. So I'm going to place my view in front of the scene like this, then with Shift A I'll add a new camera, but you probably already have one. Now press Ctrl Alt and 0 on the number pad to align the camera with your view. Now we can see what the camera is looking at, and again I recommend you keep your 3D cursor on this bottle and you keep your 3D cursor as a pivot point. So now when you look at things from the camera perspective, you can rotate the camera around the scene. We can shift it up and down by pressing R and double X. So I'm going to lower it just a little bit. And I also want to zoom in by going to the camera properties here and increasing the focal length a little bit. Now let's go back to the animation workspace. With numpad 0, we're going to enter camera view, and we can go back to rendered view now. And here's a preview of the animation which we created so far from the camera perspective. As you can see, it already looks pretty damn good. In the material properties for this glass material on the bottle, I'm going to adjust the refraction. If I increase that a little bit, I think it looks a little bit better. And now the last thing I want to adjust here is the background, where I want to have some lights. I don't want this simple green color. I want there to be a slightly lighter circle around this bottle. So with Shift A, I'm going to add a new light. We can use an area light again, lift that up above the scene, rotate it like this, and then push it backwards on the x-axis. We're going to set the pivot point back to median so that we can scale this up from its median point, crank up the power to something crazy. Now from camera view, you can see the difference in the background if we move this around. It might look better if we change the shape of this light from square to disc, although it doesn't seem to make much of a difference in this case. But anyway, now you know that you can change the shape of an area light. You can also change the color of this light if that makes any difference for you. I think it looks pretty cute if we make this a little bit purple, because that makes the background look a little bit more bluish, which matches this color on the label right here a little bit better. Now here's the crazy thing. You can animate any property on Earth in Blender, even the power of a lamp. So on frame 0, I don't want this lamp to be very powerful. I'm going to place the marker on frame 0, select the lamp. We're going to keyframe the power around 1000, and then when this bottle gets in our face right here, I want this light to be a lot brighter, so I'm going to crank up the power a little bit. We're gonna try something like 3-4000. Now keyframe this again and watch what happens now. As you can see, it starts off quite dark and then it gets brighter as we play the animation, and it remains bright for the rest of the scene. You can even animate the colors of this light if you want to, but I don't want to mess with that too much. I'm just going to play around with the power keyframes a little bit, and I think that's going to look pretty damn good. Now that we got this out of the way, let me show you how to do something way cooler with this animation, because I promised you I will show you how this is going to turn into 3 bottles. So around this point in time, I want more bottles to appear from behind this bottle, but I don't want them to be visible before this moment. So we're going to select this bottle and everything attached to it. In my case, there are some pills on the inside, so I'm also going to copy those, and make sure to also copy this empty inside of the bottle. So with Shift D, we're going to duplicate that and place it somewhere around here. Delete the first keyframe, and around this point we want this to come out from behind this bottle and sit here on the side next to this bottle. So on this keyframe right here, after this is done spinning, we're going to take this duplicated version and place it over here. Maybe lower it down a little bit and maybe throw it a little bit further back like this. Now press I, keyframe location rotation, and here's what happens right now. Now because we still have this last keyframe, this bottle still wants to move to this position over here where it was supposed to be initially. So on this last keyframe, we're going to move it to the final position which is going to be something like this. So again, keyframe location rotation, and now this is going to act a little bit better. We can also move these keyframes around a little bit so it doesn't look too unnatural. Now I want to make sure that this bottle is not going to be visible at all until I want it to come out here. So on this frame, when it starts coming out, I'm going to press I, keyframe location, rotation, and scale. And now we're telling Blender that at this point in time we want to remember this scale. Then we're going to move one frame back, and we're going to significantly reduce the scale to make sure that it's not visible. And once again, keyframe location, rotation, and scale. Now this object is going to be too small to be visible before, so it's just going to pop out when we want it to. Just to prevent any weird shit, we're going to take this keyframe and push it backwards a little bit further. Now the scale is going to change a bit more gradually, and it won't just appear out of nowhere, but it's going to look a little bit more natural. This is what we have so far. So we're going to duplicate this bottle again with Shift D, place it somewhere out here, delete the first keyframe, and again at this point in time I want this bottle to be out here somewhere. Maybe I'll bring this one a little bit closer just for arrangement and aesthetic purposes. Now it looks like they're gradually getting bigger. It's kind of like that Tom and Jerry scene where you got the elephants. So we're going to keyframe location and rotation like this, and again for the last keyframe we also have to fix the position. So move to the last frame, move this out, rotate it a little bit, bring it a little bit closer, and again keyframe location rotation. And of course we have to move to this keyframe again, keyframe location rotation scale, and a couple of keyframes before that we're going to reduce the scale and keyframe location rotation scale one more time. In fact, in this case that doesn't look too realistic. I'm going to delete this keyframe, and on this frame right here I'm going to keyframe location rotation scale instead, and on this one right here I'm going to scale it down and keyframe all that again. It still looks a little bit silly because it's very obvious that this is coming out of inside the bottle. So on this keyframe right here we better change the position and throw this in the background, keyframe all that, and before you know it this is going to look a lot more natural. And of course we're probably going to have to mess around with these keyframes a little bit more, but in general we're more or less there. It's only a matter of making minor adjustments at this point. And before you know it, look how beautiful this animation looks all of a sudden. You just watched one tutorial and I showed you how to do this from scratch. Unless you're a complete beginner, then you probably already know how to make this bottle. Now you can't tell me that you can't make no money with Blender. If you are a complete beginner, then let me know and I'm going to teach you how to make this bottle from scratch. But I don't know how many of you are complete beginners. But don't worry, I can make this tutorial tomorrow if you want me to. So just let me know and you're gonna see that in no time. Also, if you don't know how to get any clients, I already made a couple of videos about this before, but you can join my Discord and talk to the folks over there. We got over 3,000 people now. You can get some feedback on your artworks and share your stuff. You can share your artworks and get some feedback on them. There's plenty of people in here making some money, so don't worry, we're gonna help you out. If you're really serious about learning Blender and making some money, then follow me on Instagram because I'm going to have an enormous announcement to make for you guys soon. You guys are not ready, this is gonna be some crazy shit. You can also always reach out to me on Instagram. Unless you ask me something stupid, I'm probably going to be able to reply to you. And if you like this video and you want to learn more about my modeling and texturing techniques in Blender, or if you just want to support my channel, then check out my Blender ebook. I put everything that I know in there. You're gonna find the link below this video. So let me know what you want to see next, and I'll see you guys in the next one.